Hello, and thank you for joining me for Techno Day. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Jamie Indigo, and we're going to have a conversation I'm very passionate about today, and that is disinformation, ethics, human impact of search engine optimization. You may know me from being on the internet. I'm talking JavaScript frameworks. I am a big fan of D&D, currently working with the Deep Crawl crew. It's a fantastic team, but more importantly, I have always and will continue to be fascinated with search engines. These beautiful beasts, they give us important information like the average male height being potato. And how else would I know that the human memory span is approximately 7, or that Bill Nye's hair color is in fact dinosaur gendered black? These are all things that we see in search every day and we trust on them. And 88% of searches worldwide are going through Google. We trust this information inherently throughout our life. In fact, the US government said that Google made up nearly 90% of search engine queries and almost 95% of searches on mobile. This is huge. This is a key cornerstone of our life. I mean, how else would I know all these important things that are so complex, financial decisions, medical? If we look at this study done by Path Interactive in 2020, we can see most people really do rely on this when it comes to decisions on their health, on their wellness, on their well-being, their financial futures. We're all tied in this together. We use search engines because we believe they have accurate information. We inherently trust them. We see those answers pop up first thing. They're called a knowledge panel, just like the average height of a male being a potato. And for the most part, we find them incredibly trustworthy. How else would I know all the ingredients I need for my red velvet cake, including a lot of red? There are mistakes that happen. And all this information gets here by little cheat sheets. So typically when you see those rich results pop up in a SERP, search engine results page, they're from structured data, and that's a fancy technical term for slipping a cheat sheet to a search engine that says exactly what it's about in a language they specifically understand. Here's the thing though, this code isn't inherently moral. It's just code, but does it have a moral value? It has an action and it has a consequence. Here's a SERP that was served in 2016, and it asked a very inflammatory question. Google since acknowledged, hey, this is pretty problematic. A BBC reporter brought it to public attention, and very quickly we can see that SERP changed. These are adapting. They're constantly in flux as new information arises, as new questions are asked, as their meaning of words changes in a culture. We see the information presented to us in that ubiquitous black box of our phone change on the daily. Sometimes it's intentionally curated. Sometimes these changes are not by accident in the slightest. Let's look at TurboTax. They offer a product known as Free Edition, and that's distinctly different from the Free File program that's part of the IRS's Free Filing Alliance. They have very similar names. It's not by accident, nor was the directive placed on that page. This little line of code that you would never see as a human told search engines, hi, don't return this when in search. And that meant users who are eligible to qualify for free filing weren't able to. And in fact, the majority of people who used the TurboTax product were eligible for free filing, but because they had been misled on where to go, they didn't. They ended up paying about $60 to $120 a piece. And these are folks who are making less than $35,000 a year. Those who could be arguably stated as the least benefited demographic that product serviced. TurboTax responded to it. They said, we recognize that our overall search approach may have made it harder for customers to find this free file program, so we're undertaking a thorough review. Nothing about that was accidental. This was very much driven to curate what they showed in search engine results pages to get the ROI for the products that they wanted. All right, let's be an expert source. What about expert sources? When we go to search engines, we frequently believe that the results we're seeing there are from people who are experts in that subject matter. They know exactly what they're talking about. Have you heard of Dr. Bukaki? This is real. In 2008, that name didn't raise a ton of red flags. It clearly does in 2020. But this professor went out and did a bunch of link building exercises, a bunch of outreach as a facial dermatologist. He had a full website, he had a fake research fund, and real medical websites and funds linked to this. This doctor was created by an SEO who was trying to drive traffic to a porn site. And it worked. Once this link builder had enough credibility, they cloaked the redirects and began sending users clicking on those search engine results to external links, even those from highly credited medical sites, to very explicit content. So the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy actually names SEOs, search engine optimizers, practitioners like myself, as one of the core ethical issues facing the existence of search engines and its happy harmony with the humans who rely on it so heavily. And they're not wrong. We have a ton of ways of manipulating search. We have introduced ambiguation. Think flooding the web with wrong addresses or phone numbers for a competitor. If you're a local business and you're trying to outrank someone else, what better way than trying to make it impossible for your competitor to be found? Google bombing. This was first really came to prominence when Dan Savage of the Savage Love podcast had a bit of a vendetta against Rick Santorum in the 2004 elections and repurposed the meaning of the name Santorum. We also have 302 hijacking, like we just talked about with Dr. Bukaki, where the links were originally a content that you could trust and find value in, but suddenly they were going somewhere much less family friendly or safe for work. We also have typo squatting, making very close URLs, even social profiles. Always check for those blue check marks. There's hundreds of sneaky tactics, and you can argue that the entire web span team at Google is dedicated to fighting disinformation. It's just a lot of ways we may not be familiar with just yet. These tactics, though, were still in use. So the work from Dr. Bukaki is still going on. This didn't stop once those redirects were launched, and everyone was a bit surprised. And just this past July, a Jewish newspaper published an article from an author named Oliver Taylor. He made a very strong claim against a pair of individuals out of the UK who were best known for their lawsuit against a surveillance company, NSO. He claimed that they were sympathizers to terrorists. It was a very inflammatory piece, and unfortunately those accused in the article were never able to go ahead and combat that because Oliver doesn't exist. He's entirely a deepfake. This image of him was computer generated, and it didn't take very much for the people behind it to not only keep their anonymity, but to create trustworthy content on the web that expressed their message and their desire for how people perceived those under attack in the piece. These are not new strategies. I was a link outreach manager back in 2010. My cold call pitches worked. I would send emails and pitch to different companies. Hi, can I write for you? I want a backlink here. I'll write for you about this. And I used a persona as well. That way, the persona would stay even after I left the company. These are problematic, but very real tactics that have been going on for a very long time. We can manufacture experts. Headshots is a website called This Person Does Not Exist. Do you want to make audio? Speech Leo. You can even make videos using MugJam. So if you're trying to leverage a new product from one of your clients and Google's particularly valuing video reviews, you can fake one. These are all tactics being used readily by those manipulating those search engine results that you trust daily. So let's look at 5 core issues that come with search engines, with their ubiquity and with our reliance to them. First off, privacy and consent. Google is not offering the services to you out of the kindness of its heart. This company made nearly $182 billion last year, and 71% of that comes from advertising. Google search doesn't exist in a pristine bubble. It's not untainted and separated from all the other products. It's part of a larger ecosystem, and each one of them tracks you. They say they gather 2 things. They gather information about what you use in their services and the content you create with their services. This is a slippery slope that I may see in a user agreement that you probably didn't read anyways. Here are all the products in play. each one of these interconnects. Any purchase that you've made and you received a receipt to your Google Gmail inbox, they know about that. Photos that you deleted from Google Photos, they know about those too. In 2018, Google actually cut a deal with MasterCard, and they're sharing information. We have an active lawsuit right now for $5 billion because incognito search really wasn't that incognito. Your information was still tracked, that was still gathered. There's a large gap between our perception of our rights and how we use tools and what the implications of them are. This MasterCard deal meant that Google shared their database with MasterCard to track purchases between you searching online for information about that and making a conversion in store. It's pretty big. It's not just kept to themselves. And there's not exactly transparency behind this. In 2019, Google was sued for inappropriately accessing medical data. This incognito ruling is happening right now, and the judge who looked at the information and patterns of user tracking in incognito mode said they were truly disturbed to it. So let's maybe pivot this. We know big bad tech is all around us. It's very scary, but we're humans and we have a life to live. We've got to find directions, we've got to check our emails, and our lives are digital. So what about us as humans? What happens when we become the product that's offered? Information, personal information that you didn't want exposed being out on the web. Right now, there are companies out there that will sell your phone number, your address. If you have ever had troubles with your finances or with the law, your mugshot might be up on search right now, and they'll remove it for that small price of something exorbitant. It's a hard reality, but 63% of women have experienced a technology-based abuse by their partners. Those who've been in dangerous domestic violence situations and had to leave face a constant challenge as they relocate to ensure that their new address, their new phone number, all the information doesn't get out. This is a painful and very real reality, and people's lives are put at risk. Is Google inherently responsible for information they simply found on the internet? Well, they do offer you a way to go ahead and remove that. This is new though. This came out in 2020. And we're looking at, well, what do I do? I don't own this website. You want me to contact the site owner and say, hey, could you stop blackmailing or exploiting me? That really doesn't feel like an effective way for me to deal with something that's not okay. Well, if you're running into that, they have the ability for you to fill out this form. If you are being the victim of revenge porn or you're being doxxed, it's a form. And that seems to really take away the gravity and the human impact of what's happening here. There's even new documentation on what to do if you are deepfake porn. If you've done every rule they ever told you, been the most chaste person around every electronic device, kept tape over every camera, you could still be put into these situations and have to deal with them in your real life. These are the real issues that we face with our reliance on technology. The second major point that we have to be concerned about is monitoring and surveillance. It's kind of funny that people are hypothetically a little riled up right now with the idea of a vaccine implanting a microchip. These are the same folks who are tweeting about it from the phone in their pocket, which is actively GPS tracking. It's a little hypocritical, but there is a real ramification of surveillance in our world. The George Floyd protests that broke out. These were Black Lives Matter protesters who were looking to have accountability and to speak their truths to the communities they represented who were disenfranchised, who had been abused systematically, and they needed to hear their voices heard. This was important. What's also important to know is that law enforcement agencies were taking pictures of those crowds and cross-identifying with real people's social media profiles. And by default, unless you changed it, your Facebook is indexed by Google. It's easy to find. This is information from Timid Gebru. She was a leader in Google's AI ethics team. And she specifically called out in this forum that the Baltimore police were using facial recognition to go ahead and try and figure out who these protesters were and target them. Again, nonviolent protesters, to the point where she encouraged people not to share images because you could be putting others at risk. Timit spoke out very vocally about the impact of surveillance, how this information was made available through Google. And in December 2020, she was fired for refusing to tone down her criticism of how facial recognition patterns worked within Google. This is big and it has a massive impact. Our democracy, how we view the community and the culture that we live in. This can be viewed as censorship. This can be threats to liberty and freedom. These are real concerns with valid basis. Even if we look at our last election, we know that 50% of clicks are going to go to the top 2 listings on a search results page. Did you know that when a candidate is in those top 2, users are more likely to view them favorably? There was a 48.4% increased favorable perception of the top position candidates. And this was research done by an American psychologist at the Institute for Behavioral Research and Technology in California. This is from 2016. I believe this individual one was done in 2010, but the information still applies. And more disturbing than that was 75% of users in that study didn't realize that the position of a candidate in SERP impacted their perception. After the 2016 election, Google dove in and did a moratorium on how security and disinformation may have played. They published a 2-page white paper. In it, there's basically quick bullet points. Each one of them says, we found this here and we took care of it. But I found the section about search and news to be a little bit like the end of a Ray Bradbury tale, a bit dystopian, a bit disturbing. So they claim we maintain extensive protections against spams, bots, and other attempts to game our search results. Even so, bad actors sometimes seek to artificially boost their rankings, for example, through paid link schemes. We found no evidence that state-funded or state-linked actors used inappropriate methods to boost their ranking. What does improper methods mean here? Well, it's really vague. It takes you to a link that has a lot of documentation. It's quite old. And doing a little bit deeper research on here, particularly called out the idea of using a bot farm that would go ahead and find your result in SERP and click it. So the higher click-through rate would feed back to Google search and say, this is relevant and valuable. Let's go ahead and boost it up in rankings. So that bottom link right there, sending automated queries to Google. If you go to that and you read the details, it explicitly calls out a product that the website was DOA on in 2007. There have not been updates to this. The idea of improper only being a link scheme gives me great pause and question. If we look at reports done in 2016 by New Relic, I believe, they saw that 52% of traffic was bot traffic on the internet. What other ways are these things being manipulated? And what about those that are just done in the light of day, brazenly? This was a SERP page for Joe Biden 2020. I searched for this back in September of 2020. That result, joebiden.info, is actually created and run by a member of the Trump campaign, the consultant behind the Death Star initiative, who specialized in SEO. You have users out there who are looking for alternative answers. And when they find things like this, it's easy to believe in them. And there are ramifications to it. All right. So what if we just took Google out of the equation? We say, what are our alternatives? How can we do this maybe a bit better? Well, in January 2021, Google did an experiment impacting about 1% of users in which they removed local news from search. So the information most relevant to you and your community was no longer there. Rachel did the math. If it's only 1%, and in Australia, Google has 95% of the market share, that's 200,000 users. And she's not wrong saying This feels like a bit of blackmail to me. Google spokesman stated, in 2018, we provided $218 million worth of referral traffic to you. This experiment is also related to some ongoing legislation that's legislation between the Australian government and Google on do they have to pay the sources that they cite, the content that they scrape, similar to what Facebook's going through. Next up is ultimately what I feel to be the biggest problem for search engines, and our reliance on them and our relationship with them as just humans. We don't understand how they work. This was shared on Twitter by a lovely friend named Carolyn, and this person she knew in Facebook wanted to go ahead and shout from the rooftops that she truly did not believe in the COVID pandemic. She had searched on Google and saw only 526 new cases. And when she searched again, only 526 new cases. She was then aware that her previous behavior patterns and how she interacted with the search engine changed what came up to her. It's a problem we frequently face. We think we're getting unbiased facts, but personalization fundamentally changes how your search looks. Your user behavior patterns, the words you use, the way you communicate, the things you search for will impact the results that you were given. If you were to search for a company name on Sunday night, it's going to provide you job listings at that company because Google has the perception that a user, likely in your demographic, as you are in digital, like I am, if you're searching for a company on Sunday night, you don't want to go to work Monday morning, and you're probably looking for a new job. Well, when it comes to hard facts, Google did roll out the fact checker, and this came out in 2019. They made a big push to have it available for political candidates and campaigns in 2020. They encouraged directly sites that were covering the pandemic and the presidential election to use fact checker information and new tools they had made explicitly for it. Even then, when we have fact checkers and perhaps even a little bit better idea of how personalization impacts us, Google's need to be right about everything is also problematic. This is a Google Trends graph for the brand Wayfair. That giant spike right there isn't an amazing promotion. Actually, it's a bit of a scandal. We had a couple of social media influencers on a live stream make accusations. They took a big brand and they timed it with a salacious scandal. That had people's interest. Big brand already has big visibility, big scandal, something we could all really care about. It wasn't true. And, of course, Wayfair didn't get the lion's share of those clicks. People didn't want to go to their site to shop for a new credenza. They wanted to read about the juicy gossip, about the salacious details they had just heard. And it was an echo chamber. They got search engine results pages that were link after link after link, none of them with substantial information, all just repeating the scandal back again and again. And humans, when we hear something enough times, when we keep hearing it repeated, when we see it over and over again, we're vulnerable to believe it. It's called illusory truth. When you hear something repeated over and over again, even if it's a scandalous search term and a full page of the same information with nothing new, the fact that it's been repeated constantly gives you a little bit more faith that it's real. It's part of how humans are wired. Even the most clever of us are not immune to this. Back in 2015, NATO actually recognized memes as a type of warfare because they allow you to repeat an idea over and over and over again. And that constant exposure makes you more prone to believe it, whether you intended to or not. What happened with Wayfair is called a data void. So a data void is when there is no information that matches that exact query. And instead, there's fertile ground and suddenly a very high search volume for sites to come in and provide that answer, as thin as it may be. There's 5 types of them. We have data voids about breaking news. We saw this, unfortunately, a lot when it came to how COVID was being handled a year ago. We have strategic new terms, outdated terms, fragmented concepts, problematic queries. These were all first identified in 2018. Unfortunately, Google didn't really choose to acknowledge them. And the first that I can find opportunity they chose to acknowledge a data void was in this past September. And again, it was for an inflammatory term. These follow patterns. Let's take a group of people or a big brand, let's put a scandal next to it. Or in this case, let's exploit that this specificity to this object is a chance for us to be highly incendiary. These vulnerabilities are a technical requirement. You're here, you work in tech, you understand that everything has a weakness. We simply have to prioritize the risk and how much lift it's going to be to fix for us. This past summer, Google finally closed a gap where that knowledge graph, that one that told us about potatoes and average male heights, you could manipulate that by just adding a query parameter on and then adding keywords after it. And you could stuff it, you could ambiguate it. So if your competitor's knowledge graph was up and they opened a dance studio, suddenly you were referring to them as a laundromat. And when Google no longer had that threshold of confidence on what that business was about, it dropped from SERP. There's known issues with iframes being supported. They're on every web page, though. They're the standard way we embed videos. So if Google were to fix security issues and perhaps stop supporting iframes, they'd actually be cutting off their own product. They're not going to do that. These vulnerabilities are built in. They trust sources of data like Wikidata. So for the longest time, SEOs were in there manipulating Wikidata entries. Of course, they've cracked down on that. They want to keep that safe, secure, and trustworthy. But there's always new pipelines. There's new visual scans that you can do. You can contribute information by doing like a 3D scan of an object, contributing that to a knowledge bank as they launched Google Eye. Well, you can also spoof having a Pixel phone, and in the metadata, you can put in thousands of words and manipulate how it understands any concept. These are built-in pieces, and they're foundational issues that make it persistently vulnerable. Ultimately, what can we do? I'm not going to play the recycling game with you and tell you that if you don't recycle, you're going to make a polar bear cry instead of calling for corporate accountability, because ultimately that's what we're here about. You're here because you understand the impact of technology on humans. We don't live in bubbles. I would tell you to go in the break room and ask a question and see you Google something, but we can't do that right now. You understand. You're part of this community, and that means you can see what's going on. You have better eyes and are better equipped to be a watchdog in your respective field than anyone else. And that's fundamentally what we need right now. People to speak out, stand up. Jeanette lost her job, but she maintained her ethics. And that's the type of person I want to aspire to be. If I can't do that, I can teach others how search engines work. Turn off the caps lock when you do it. It's real easy to be frustrated. But if, as some have suggested, a lot of the disinformation we've encountered has been from outside state-funded groups, the ultimate goal of that is to cause division. And when you can make a group infight, you would let them weaken themselves. So always check your facts before you share information out. Are other known respectable sources saying the same thing? Do they cite the first-party source? If you make content, learn how to talk about misinformation without amplifying it. This is a challenge. It is something worth taking up. Be aware of the hidden cost of free tools. A free tool is great, but when you think about how much you get versus how much you're giving, it may provide a new perspective to it. And on a personal level, be aware of how much data you have. Unfortunately, all of those great products across search engines and search engine adjacent things have individual opt-outs in most of them. So it takes time. You have to sit down, but you could do that for yourself and for others who may not be aware. The most important thing we can do here is, if we understand disinformation to be a goal, we understand the short-term play to game a system at the cost of humans being negatively impact ethics behind it, we have to take a counterpoint that is stronger than any of it, and that is simply kindness. We need to be kind to one another. There is no way for you to yell a relative out of an anachronistic or problematic thought, but you can ask them questions. Or maybe at the least you can change how they view having a conversation with someone who disagrees with them. We don't have to fight. I can still love you, Grandma, even though I'm going to need you to stop talking right now. Hypothetically. We're in a world where we're highly dependent on search engines. We ask them everything. We rely. And we have to understand what that means and the human aspect of it. Thank you so very much for joining me today. My name is Jamie Indigo. It's chaos. Be kind. And thank you.